welcome SmartSearch clients and guests to the SmartSearch Best Practices webinar on Revolutionizing Talent Engagement with video presented by our special guest, Greg Rokos. Greg is the founder and the CEO of GreenJobInterview. He's a sought-after speaker and thought leader on the topic of recruiting and sourcing methodologies, and Greg's a 25-year veteran in the recruiting space. My name is Cindy Travella. I'm the Manager of Marketing at SmartSearch and your Master of Ceremonies for today's presentation. Also joining us is my SmartSearch colleague, Sylvia Dalby, who will be fielding questions along with Greg during the presentation. Good morning, Sylvia.
Good morning, Cindy. Thank you.
You're welcome. Greg will be stopping intermittently during the presentation to address your questions, time allowing. So any questions left unanswered during the program will be addressed offline later via personal email. You'll also see a question box on the control panel. We'll be monitoring this, so you're welcome to type in your questions throughout the presentation, and you can do so by keying them directly into that box. So before we get started, there's a few housekeeping tasks I want to cover. I'm calling your attention to the GoToWebinar control panel. You'll see a chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. If you experience any technical difficulties, you can alert me via the chat box. However, if you're experiencing intermittent problems with hearing the presentation or seeing the slides, I recommend exiting out and re-entering the presentation. That tends to do the trick. Also note there's a little arrow on the control panel that points to the right. Clicking this arrow will minimize the control panel so you can better see the entirety of the slides. And for the best viewing, we recommend you maximize your screen. You can also drag and drop the chat box and question box from the control panel if you wish to remove it from the control panel prior to minimizing them. The presentation slides will be available to everyone in attendance, and I'll provide you with more information at the end of the webinar on how to obtain a copy. Also, we'll be tweeting comments during the webinar, so if you wish to follow along there or participate with updates, please use the hashtag SmartSearchAPS. During today's webinar, Greg will be discussing how video interviewing creates efficiencies and reduces overall spend, how it increases quality time with candidates, reduces time to fill and missed opportunities for hiring quality candidates, how it enhances your company's employer brand messaging, and allows you to convey your company's story in a meaningful way that resonates with candidates. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to hand off the controls to our special guest presenter, Greg Rokos.
Thank you so much, Cindy, and thank you, Sylvia and SmartSearch for having me. Delighted to be here today, and thank you, everyone, for attending. I'm going to quickly ask that the first slide is up, Revolutionizing Talent Engagement with Video, and confirm that that is ready to go. Everyone can see that?
Yes, we can see it. Thank you, Greg.
Great. And you can see we use the word revolutionizing in the header of our presentation, and I want everyone to know we don't use that lightly. It seems like there's a lot of technology platforms and folks claiming to be revolutionizing talent engagement or recruiting, and so we want to start off by saying, again, we really believe it. I don't know if it's going to be in 2 years or 5 years, but I think we're going to look back and look at the influence of video with talent engagement, similar to the way we look at moving, the move from the back of the Sunday newspaper job postings to the job boards. So, and again, as Cindy mentioned, I would like, I'm not going to wait till the end for Q&A. Kind of throughout the session, would like to do that and make it a productive and informative session, and hopefully have some good back and forth, okay? Just a little bit about me. I started my career in 1991 with a physician search firm, recruited doctors all over the country, and then moved into the executive search arena. And so I've been passionate ever since 1991 about recruiting, and really what's motivated me is to help organizations find effective and efficient ways to build great teams and also get a lot of satisfaction of helping job seekers, helping people find meaningful and fulfilling work. So I am a recruiter at heart, and again, passionate about making good matches and looking for effective and efficient ways to do that. Hope not to put anybody to sleep today, and give you some meaningful takeaways that you can take back to your organization if you're not doing so already, and even if you leave here with one idea that you want to explore when you get back to your organization. I hope we can do that here. But some of them that we're going to be talking about is the way in which you engage talent, improving your employer brand, improving the candidate experience as they interact with your organization, using video to source as well as hire. Of course, some of the benefits like reducing time to hire and recruiting costs, being able to spend more time with the candidates that ultimately you end up hiring, and then being able to measure and quantify your success. So first of all, why talent engagement, and what are we talking about in talent engagement? And simply put, this is how you interact with those who may consider working for your organization. It seems simple, but it's very, very significant. It's no longer an option. We have to, as hiring organizations, start thinking about how we engage with talent, because it does have a direct impact on our bottom line. And I think you'll hear folks discuss how candidates and potential folks that interact with you when they consider working for your organization are also potential customers for your business as well. I realize some businesses that applies more so than others, but especially today with transparency and social media and sites like Glassdoor, where job seekers can discuss your brand and their experience with your brand, talent engagement becomes, again, not only critical for those charged and responsible with hiring for the organization, but the entire business, and again, direct impact on the bottom line. And I think it's important to know we're going to focus, somewhat on the pre-hire impact, but it's also talent engagement is critically important after hire. So I'm going to touch. You'll hear me talk about ideas and things not only from all the way from pre-hire to retire. Okay.
Thanks, Greg. One thing I like to point out that you just mentioned is that anybody that visits your website, maybe they're a job seeker, but they might be a customer. They might be both, right? And job seekers and customers all want the same three things, right? They want respect, they want responsiveness, and they want a resolution. And that resolution is if they're not hired, if they are hired, whatever the resolution is that you can't leave them hanging out there.
Fantastic point, and that's absolutely correct. And I'm going to talk about an example later, but when you think of organizations, the amount of effort and thought and importance that they place on their marketing for customers, as well as their product development, we need to afford that same importance to talent engagement. Anything else, Sylvia? Did you want to?
No, thank you.
Okay,
you're absolutely right.
So digital maturity is more than just video interviews and video conferencing, but video is a key component to digital maturity, and you see here on the slide that it's very important to job seekers that they work for and select an organization that is digital mature. And this can be everything from when they visit your career site, is there video content, and again, video interviewing on the pre-hire selection, or what kind of collaboration tools you allow for talent post-hire. And I'm hearing some kind of a noise feedback too. I don't know if somebody's not on mute, but I'm hearing some banging.
Sorry. I think that was me. I'm always banging around.
Okay. So, allowing for again, digital maturity, video, collaboration tools can take place after someone joins the organization as well. Think of onboarding. What kind of video technologies are you employing after the person accepts the position, and how do you immerse them in the culture, and how do you get them connected with other folks within the organization? So digital maturity and video as a big part of that can help with fit, can help people fit into the organization, certainly removes the barriers of geography when you can have collaboration tools, can make employees more productive, as you can see some studies here suggest, and it also gives them, again, the feeling that they're working with an organization that if they're digitally mature and provide these tools, that they're more likely to be successful in their core business. Next slide, the role of video in engagement. So where does it fit into the organization, and how can you leverage it to enhance your talent engagement? So again, I mentioned from the career site as a starting point. Do you have video content there in the career site? Are you doing video job posting? Are you adding video to your job descriptions and your posting? Are you creating and distributing video through social media? And again, all of these different ways in which it could be used: employer branding, sourcing candidates, candidate experience, communication efficiency, tracking hiring metrics, and of course the ones we first think of in terms of reducing recruiting budgets and lower travel costs. And I would add to that reducing time to fill for positions as well. So let's go through these. The next slide, personal connections. As a recruiter, and I know there's a lot of recruiters, on the presentation today. When you think about what ultimately leads to a hiring decision on behalf of the organization, and accepting the offer on behalf, from the job seeker's perspective, it's really about making a connection somewhere along the line, that job seeker's journey throughout the interview process and evaluation process of the organization. They've made a connection with someone that they see themselves being able to work for and with, and same thing on the side of the hiring organization. Somewhere through that process, they really made a connection with that candidate, and they believe that there's a fit, and that they feel that they would be a good addition and a good team member in the organization. So developing personal connections pre-hire is absolutely critical, and then also keeping them engaged after hire. So you see, you talk about the 70% of employees being disengaged because they feel no personal connection on their job. We need to look at how are we engaging talent from a retention standpoint. We all know how costly and disruptive it is when we make a bad hire. So we need to start thinking about these kinds of technologies and platforms to stay engaged with talent even after they've joined us. And let's talk a little bit about employer branding and talent engagement. So essentially, everything that falls, employer branding is everything that falls under the umbrella of recruiting content is employer branding. And Sylvia, you mentioned job seekers, and customers will do the same thing. One of the examples I like to use is PepsiCo. PepsiCo is a $70 billion revenue global organization with brands like Gatorade, Tropicana, Quaker Oats, Frito-Lay. They have 270,000 plus employees worldwide. As you might imagine, they literally receive millions of applications worldwide each year. And they're an organization that realized early on every single person that comes into contact with their employment brand is also very likely a prospect to buy their products. So when they look at their messaging that falls under the recruiting umbrella, as well as the experience that the candidate's going to have from the very first visit to the career page to the application process to getting some kind of resolution, as Sylvia mentioned, they're thinking about it in terms of how are we treating our customers that we want to buy our products, and it makes they have significant measurable success in doing that, and just to pay attention to that whole process and start to measure things and is the first step in being able to improve it and give it the same kind of attention, as I mentioned, that the folks charged with marketing those products to customers would give it. And you can see some studies here and some stats and percentages where this is not just an idea, a hypothesis. This is real. This is having a significant impact, as I mentioned, on the bottom line. So important to, as we approach this, that we're not just posting jobs and finding that one hire and not worrying about all the folks that we touched throughout that process that didn't result in a hire. We need to start thinking about it holistically as an entire process. Before I go on, I'll kind of do a quick pause and see if there's any input from Cindy or Sylvia or questions that you want me to tackle at this point.
Actually, we do have a couple of questions, Greg. I'm going to give you this one. What is the best way to influence the leadership decision makers to buy into video?
Data. Yeah. In a word, it's data. There's enough data out there now to show the benefits of it. I think and know your audience, right? If it's a CFO, you probably want to focus on some of the cost savings. If it's a leader that is worried about finding hard to fill positions, then you might want to focus on some of the data suggesting how significantly increased the number of applications are for positions when the postings are accompanied by the person that position reports to or the business unit leader getting in front of a camera and expressing the goals of the organization and the culture and what they're looking for and why they think it might be a good career opportunity for someone. So definitely some data, and then be prepared when you get the answer yes, we want to try something. Be prepared to measure your own data. So if you're not measuring it now, measure it now, and then use some of these techniques and measure against what you've been doing, and so that you can have your own success story as you pilot some of these approaches, and then obviously that data suggests that it's a success, and you can roll it out on a broader basis.
All right, great. Thank you, Greg.
Sure.
One question I get asked a lot about the video interviewing in general is there's this kind of idea that it replaces the face-to-face interview. I don't really think that that's true. I mean, video in some ways is face-to-face. It's not the same thing as in person, but it does give you that face-to-face opportunity. Is there anything you want to, any thoughts on that, Greg, that you want to share?
Yeah, certainly. So the technologies you're referring to absolutely are an enhancement to ultimately what will be an in-person, face-to-face interview. But there's a one-to-many component of this that is simply too impactful to ignore and to not take part of. And I want to clarify, we very much have a two-directional type of when I'm referring to this one-to-many, it's both from the hiring organization to job seekers, whether they be passive or active, and then also, of course, the candidates recording some video and telling their story back to the hiring organization. But the efficiency of it, if you have a hiring manager, a business unit leader record a 1 or 2 minute introduction that would go along with the job posting or job description, that could be viewed by hundreds, dozens, hundreds, thousands of candidates that would help them determine on the front end, are they interested enough to take the next step and submit their candidacy for the opportunity. So you certainly, a hiring manager to do that, dozens or 100 times over and over is simply, not the same as recording it once and having it be able to be accessed by that many eyeballs. And then the same is true for the candidates. If you ask a candidate 3 questions and ask them, to give a 1-minute answer each, that's 3 minutes that if they record that one time, that could be seen by multiple decision makers within the organization. And again, on the front end to help determine initially, does this seem to be a step that, or this seem to be a candidate or an opportunity that warrants further investigation. And then if it warrants further investigation on either side, then you can move to the next step. Do you want to move straight to an in-person meeting? Do you want to do a phone screen? Do you want to use some video conferencing technology so you can get a live dynamic conversation back and forth with video? So absolutely critical on the front end. And it's very much a narrowing the pool, a funnel effect, as opposed to replacing, ultimately which is that in-person experience to confirm everything that you thought up until that point.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Telling a better story. Here's the top point is what I mentioned earlier in terms of the number of applications with strong employer branding. And a lot of this goes to, if a picture speaks 1,000 words, then a video speaks infinitely more. Again, imagine for those of you who looked at jobs yourself recently, or job descriptions or posting, instead of just reading about that and maybe going to a career site and watching, a glossy, professionally shot corporate recruitment video, if you actually got to see the person that is heading up the business unit, or maybe is managing this particular recruitment effort, or is the person that the position would report to, if they're watching them tell their story with just a few minutes or even a minute of watching them tell the story, it really brings that opportunity to life in a much more meaningful way than simply a written document could do. So it helps your organization tell a better story. It immerses the candidates in a branded environment. It shows them that as an organization you are interested in technology. You are also interested and respectful of people's time. You're interested in doing things efficiently. You're not an organization where each time they meet a person for an interview, the person starts from scratch, asking you, to start from the beginning. So you're answering several questions over and over, or maybe they're bringing you back for multiple on-site interviews because multiple decision makers need to spend time with you and only can do that in person. So it is bringing a much richer content and experience to the candidates to enable them, on their own time from a smartphone or from a computer or laptop to determine and get to understand your organization and determine whether they're interested in moving forward. Okay. So telling your story with video, beyond this stat, 1.5 billion people will consume video. This is YouTube. I read a stat the other day. It hasn't made it onto the deck, but something like 70% of folks under 25 years old, they do their first searches on YouTube instead of Google, so that they could see video rather than just written responses. Again, I mentioned earlier video job postings. You're seeing more applications and more views. I expect that number will only go up as these kind of technologies enjoy more adoption. Definitely some of the benefits, shorter time to hire, as I mentioned earlier, and people I get asked about, still get asked about, diversity and EEOC concerns and is anything about these technologies troublesome from the standpoint of discrimination, and really the exact opposite is true, that it's how you use these technologies, and that they can actually support diversity and help organizations keep track and make sure that they are playing by the rules and providing candidates a consistent experience throughout the talent engagement process.
Thanks, Greg. That was actually one of my questions, would be the EEO and OFCCP concerns. And I do understand that the importance of a standardization process. Can you elaborate any, you said this actually enhances diversity recruiting efforts. Can you elaborate on that just a little bit?
Well, sure. So from a consistency standpoint, you can, using the platform, you can pre-select the questions that you want to participate, the candidates to respond to, so that there's consistency across the board. All candidates come on to the platform and receive the same questions, as opposed to bringing them through a process or a phone screen or an in-person interview where the interviewer or the person doing the screening doesn't ask or ask different questions as they go through sort of that dynamic interview. And it also allows you to reach more diverse candidate pools, because you're not having, the cost is so low that you can reach out to, whether through social media or through email campaigns, you can reach out to various constituents in a variety of locations and ask them to participate, as opposed to just drawing from your own catchment area where people are coming in for in-person interviews.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Improving the candidate experience. I used the example just a moment ago about organizations that might fly somebody in or have them drive in for multiple in-person interviews because the process isn't set up on the front end to really either be mindful of the candidate's time or even mindful of sort of the cost and time spent associated with that. So that's one way video can improve the candidate experience. And imagine as a job seeker, only going through the trouble of scheduling the time, taking time off of work or school or out of your own schedule to travel or to set aside time for a phone screen or an in-person interview. Imagine only going through all of that only after the organization, you've answered questions that they're interested in, that they can watch you answer and listen to you answer on video, and that you've watched them answer some of your questions. Again, maybe in a recorded environment or in a live environment, you're holding off on that whole process only until after both sides of the hiring equation have expressed and indicated a high level of interest. And so from the candidate standpoint, just that you probably are only going to be brought in for an in-person interview until after both sides have shared a lot of information with each other and both have determined that they want to have that. Much more efficient and effective than doing some of those initial information exchanges actually in person. Some other points here, obviously we talked about the welcome videos, dynamic video-enriched career pages, a better candidate experience, and also having a system in place whereby when you're using technology, to have a customer support function, whether that be internal or whether that be with whoever you might partner with to assist in the process, to help those candidates feel comfortable and embrace that technology so that they're feeling as though they're still able to put their best foot forward and tell their story and get their chance to tell their story and bring their resume to life, and not be encumbered by the technology, but rather enhanced and supported by the technology.
We have a question that just came in. This is from a IT staffing company, and they're kind of curious as to how it works in that type of environment. Like, let's say you're not a corporate employer, you're a staffing agency. Can you talk specifically to how this works in the staffing environment?
Sure. So we work with a lot of staffing organizations, and it's similar. The key differentiator from a staffing perspective is that these, not just ours, but other platforms, should allow the staffing organization to present candidates to their client using the technology. So, think of the staffing organization as sort of front end, and again, another part of that funnel, narrowing the funnel. But the platform should allow, once the staffing organization wants to present its shortlist to their client, they can enhance the way they've typically been presenting that shortlist, which is resume, online profile, their own notes from their interviews with them, perhaps some written references. They can now enhance that by providing their client either recorded video from the candidate answering questions into the platform, or even a recorded dynamic live exchange between the recruiter and that candidate.
And you also mentioned the possibility for panel interviews too, right?
Absolutely, and so again, regardless of, make sure if you decide to bring on a partner to provide a platform for you, you certainly want to make sure that there is the opportunity for multiple participant interviews or panel interviews, as you suggested, so that if you have multiple hiring managers dispersed across a geography, whether that's in different buildings on one campus or around the globe, that they can come in and you can have again multiple people in a dynamic live meeting room interviewing a candidate at the same time.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure from your IT staffing person that asked that question that there wasn't a follow-up question, that answered it sufficiently.
Not at this time. If it floats in, I will give you a shout out.
Great. Okay, and so I know we've been talking about this, and I wrestled with putting this slide earlier, but just so that we're on the same page, because I know that there's some different functionalities. I want to get to the essence of when we're talking about digital or video interview, what the basic essential functionality is, so that everyone on the call today can take that away. I think everyone's mind first goes to the fact that you can have the candidate answer questions on video and then screen them in or out of your hiring process. But I want to start before that. I want to start and really place emphasis on the hiring organization recording video so that they can get their message out to, as I mentioned earlier, many candidates by only having to spend the time to record that message once. So, and this video could go out to a selected group of folks, so only those, via email, whether it's passive candidate pool that you're trying to reach out to, or whether it's specifically to candidates that have applied for a particular position or expressed interest in your organization overall. But it could also go out to the general population. It could be promoted on social media. It could be on your career page that isn't position specific and isn't directed to a particular candidate or group of candidates, but rather to anyone that wants to come in and record a video and tell you a little bit about themselves and express an interest potentially in joining your organization. So video digital interviews are the ability for the hiring organization to record either an introductory greeting or a video job description to enhance and accompany the written information that you'll want to disseminate. And so that's the first piece of it. The second piece then is the ability to ask candidates to come on and record themselves telling you something. Again, it could be a very generic question. Tell us about why you would be a great addition to our organization and why you would want to join our organization, to very specific questions specific to a job rec. We've got there are hiring organizations that are out there that may ask 3, 5, 7 questions that they want candidates to record answers to as a first step in the application process, and that replaces a phone screen. So different ways to do it, but again, recorded for the hiring organizations, recorded for candidates, and then the last piece, which is the live, which is essentially, a Skype on steroids, as we call it, the live dynamic video conferencing that allows the dynamic conversation to take place that includes audio and video. So that's what we're talking about when we are discussing video or digital interviews.
Yeah, Greg, I'm glad you mentioned Skype. We have another question coming in, and this one comes from my buddy Katie. Hey, Katie, thanks for asking. She wants to know, she gets the whole compelling video piece and had mentioned why not just use Google Hangout or Skype. And on the Twitter feed, Animal, my buddy there, says that he also does Google Hangouts, that they're open to anyone to watch on YouTube or in real time. So can you talk a little bit about those platforms as well?
Absolutely. So there's a whole host of reasons why organizations choose to have their own platform as opposed to using some of the free or public platforms like Google Hangouts or Skype. And a lot of it is around it's all about the experience and workflow. So if you want to have the recorded functionality, those platforms don't allow for that. If you want it tied in with your applicant tracking system, if you want to be able to measure it and track metrics around it. There's the branding piece of it. If you want it to be the candidates to be immersed in your brand from the beginning, the security around it in terms of those being open streams as opposed to lockdown streams, the whole customer support piece of it, whereby removing sort of any technical issues that candidates and or hiring managers may have, and so kind of a combination of all of those, limited functionality, not being able to be branded, no service around it, and some security concerns for some folks as well.
Okay, thank you. There's kind of a similar question, but from a very different angle. This comes from my buddy Linda, and she says that she's used video in some of the ways that we've talked about as far back as 2007. We have a few early adopters here, and noticed that she wanted to know, how do you think it would be different today, other than with the social media and YouTube options, etc. Like, what do you think has changed in the last few years with regards to video interviews?
Well, I think what's changed is, first of all, adoption on the part of organizations. It's no longer kind of an interesting idea. Organizations are typically now in some phase of either using these kind of technologies or evaluating them in order to use them. So there's an acceptance and an adoption that's taking place that we were simply wasn't there 7, 8 years ago. The same is true on the candidate side. There's not only, I think that the first knee-jerk reaction when these technologies came out was, well, gee, this seems like a cold process to have an organization have me answer 3 questions, for example, into a webcam, as opposed to having someone call me into a phone screen. And that has shifted as candidates realize the benefit of being able to tell their story once, have it be recorded and viewed multiple times and shared within an organization. So, and there's also, I would say, from the candidates, there's an expectation when they're looking at opportunities that some of these technologies will be used by the hiring organization, even if it's a Google Hangout or a Skype, that some kind of technology, some way to engage will be employed other than the old phone screen and then come on in for an in-person visit.
Okay. We have one other question that came in to reiterate a little bit about compliance, right? EEO and OFCCP compliant. And the question is very simply, are video interviews OFCCP compliant? I want to give kind of an introductory answer to that, and then perhaps you can add any other comments, Greg. But a part of compliance here in the U.S. in employment equity laws means that everybody is treated equally, right? That as long as all candidates go through the same process, that's one thing the government really wants to see. So if you're going to do a video interview on one, you need to do it on all. Is there any other compliance issues with regards to OFCCP in particular that you want to add to that, Greg?
Thank you. Let me start by saying the EEOC and OFCCP don't come out and say this is legal, this is not legal. They review cases that are brought to them, complaints that are brought to them. The opinion letter that has been written by the EEOC says that these technologies in and of themselves are not discriminatory.
Mm-hmm.
How people use these technologies, just as how they conduct their in-person interviewing and hiring, that can be called into question. And so if folks tell you, oh, video and digital interviewing is legal and approved, that's not completely accurate. Someone may bring a case to the EEOC in the future. I'm not aware of any that have been brought thus far, but somebody may bring a case and say that they were discriminated against, and they may feel that in part a platform was used, and that was part of the discrimination. That just as somebody could come in and do a phone screen and an in-person interview and make a complaint that they felt discriminated against. So I think that's an important message.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anything else before we answer the next slide?
No, I think that looks good for now. But people, go ahead and continue asking. There's some great questions coming in. Keep it up.
Okay. So talking about enhancing the employer brand, specifically around video or digital interviews. Again, these meeting rooms are fully branded and customized with their own URL, their own logo, color, look, and feel, so that when you're engaging with talent, you're doing so under your own brand. I'll use the analogy, just as many people, organizations use their own email domain and don't use some of the free email accounts, similar to video interviews, that it's all customized and it's all name specific as well as branded. That is, and then the customer support function too. When they receive support, it's not from someone from a third-party non-branded organization. Candidate experience, we covered some of this, but we talk about reducing time to hire, moving candidates through the hiring process faster, allowing them to be able to engage with multiple decision makers within the organization without having to travel, and take time off of their work or school, whatever the case may be, and multiple teams, again, for the panel interview, and oftentimes, again, when we hear people coming in for the in-person interview, they feel as though they know they've had such an immersive experience because they've had that video element, that face-to-face, as opposed to just writing emails or a phone screen, that they feel they're much further ahead of the game in the process when they actually do come in for the in-person interview. And the same goes on the part of the hiring organization. Obviously, spending more time with the candidates you want. There is, again, we like to think of using these technologies just as much to include people into the process, not just from an excluding standpoint, but certainly there is that benefit that if you can watch the responses on several minutes of video and determine that the person is not a good fit for the position, you can move on to those that are and only bring those in for a longer, extended interview, so you're able to screen talent out in a shorter amount of time, and you're also able to quickly determine what talent you want to bring in and carry on in the process, so inclusive as well as exclusive. Of course, again, the time to fill, because you can have access to so many more candidates in this whole one-to-many concept, you can fill positions much more quickly than before. Digitally mature, we've talked about a variety of ways to do this: employer branding, sourcing, again, from the videos on the career page to the greeting videos, company videos that accompany the job posting. Here's methods, a few methods to do that. And then implementing video into your hiring process. I think the keys here, you asked the question about how do you get leadership to buy into it. I think the key for any organization that's out there that hasn't put together a plan and implemented video into the process, I think the key is get some executive sponsorship for certain. Find a business unit that has a need, or perhaps there's a business unit or a group that always loves to be on the cutting edge and try something new, or that you feel that, again, maybe is doing high volume of hiring or very specific hiring where you feel that this kind of platforms may assist in that. And then get started, film a job posting, film a quick video to accompany a job posting. And you don't need to, when I say film, I want to be specific. Recording via a webcam and the production value, while that's not a professionally shot HD, with proper lighting and all those things, no one is expecting that. What they are expecting is that authentic, personalized message, and so don't worry about shooting it on your laptop or on a smart device. Get into a quiet spot. Obviously, make sure the lighting's good. Make sure you're centered squarely in the camera. And make sure when it's something that you would want to watch. But don't worry too much. You don't need a teleprompter, and you don't need lighting, and you don't need a professional production crew to come in and do that. Just get on and do it. Tell the story. Speak from the heart and record it. And you will, obviously the first time is going to be a lot more uncomfortable than the 10th time, but start and get comfortable with it, because it's going to save you a lot of time in the long run. Talent branding, video testimonials from your employees, add them to your career page, another great way to do that. Again, integrating videos into your hiring process. There can be multiple videos. So I spoke earlier about the glossy, professionally shot, general recruitment video for the organization. That's still great, but it can be accompanied by, imagine if that were accompanied by video testimonial of someone who's joined the organization 8 months ago, as well as the person that the position will report to. So really think of enhancing all of that collateral and that content that job seekers are using to evaluate their interest in your position. Think about enhancing that with video.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought this out, because this shows very clearly that it's more than just an online video interview, that video can be incorporated at a number of touch points as candidates are visiting your website or just researching the organization.
Absolutely. And again, we're not just talking about the pre-hire selection process, interviews. Think of, what are you doing with talent if perhaps there's 2 months between the time they accept the position and they start? What are you doing to keep them engaged before their first start date? And then what are you doing for the after they are there? Excuse me. Video is increasingly playing a more and more important role in that.
Thanks.
Hey, Greg, we have one more question.
Yes.
Is there a lot of training involved in learning how to use video technology?
So from a technology standpoint, these are not complicated platforms. This is not, we don't this isn't a 2-week, everyday lunch and learn session, to learn a whole new, like a CRM system. That being said, it's unique in that a lot of people do feel uncomfortable as soon as that light on the webcam comes on. So it does require time and practice to get that comfort level being on camera, but I think that's the lion's share of the training, is really getting comfortable being in front of the camera. The actual learning the technology of it is fairly simple.
Right, great, thank you.
So again, to the question earlier, how do you get leadership to buy in? I said to measure, data. There's a lot of ways to measure data and measure, success with video. Again, sort of the basic ones, right? Your time to fill. But I think it starts with, are you measuring what you're doing now? Do you know how many people you interview before you make a hire? Do you know how many people you screen, do some kind of screening before that leads to an interview? And what time is spent on that? How many is your average phone screen? 30 minutes. Do you do 15 phone screens that leads to one interview, or do you do 5? Measure all of that. Organizations, oftentimes I'll ask them, what did they spend on candidate travel as an entire organization? Reimburse candidate travel. Shockingly, some don't measure that. So if you're not measuring that now, you need to have a starting point, because if you're reimbursing candidate travel and you're spending $1 million on reimbursed candidate travel, or $100,000, and you're only hiring 15% of those folks that you're bringing in, then you're spending $85,000 or $850,000 on folks that you're not hiring. So have a starting point, and then as you use these technologies, continue to measure against that. And obviously, the goal is to use that data to say, and most organizations start with a little pilot, and I encourage that. Start small before you go big, and prove it, and get the proof and the data points, and then say, have we reduced the amount of time we spend on phone screens? Have we reduced the number of interviews it takes to ultimately make a hire? Are we reducing candidate travel? And are we reducing the amount of time our hiring managers are having to spend with folks, because we're more effectively bringing in talents that has a higher likelihood of being a good fit? So ROI, critical to measure, but in order to do that, you've got to be measuring data points now if you're not using video in your process.
Greg, we've talked quite a bit about all of the great advantages of video, and what do you think are some of the biggest mistakes or pitfalls that video presents? Like, what can go wrong?
Great question. Really good question. I think it's critical for organizations to know where to use video, which positions does it make sense for, the different functionalities of the video. And I'll use a drastic example. But if you're a hospital and you're trying to attract the best neurosurgeon in the country, you probably shouldn't send them an email with a link where they can come onto a platform and 3 questions pop up that you want them to answer, right? That's not going to be a fit there. You're probably not going to get a high response rate. On the other hand, if you're doing a recruitment for some campus recruiting, or perhaps you're doing for sales, entry-level sales position, then that part of this kind of technology, where you ask them to tell them your story through a series of questions on a recorded digital interview or video interview platform, that makes all the sense in the world. High volume, where perhaps you receive several hundred applications for a position, and you're trying to narrow down that funnel, and you're looking for a meaningful way to do that with as opposed to taking the time to look through all those applications or phone screen, and so that would be a good fit. And then using the live for those the live piece of the platform for those positions where the talent might be harder to find, more passive, further along in their career, up in the executive level. So knowing where to apply, which part of the platform to which positions is going to embrace it will dramatically improve results. And then probably the biggest where I've seen organizations fall short is the reluctance for they themselves and their key leaders, recruiters, to get in front of that webcam and do the same thing that you're asking of candidates, which is to get in front of a webcam and tell their story. For organizations to just do this and say we're gonna do everything the same and just ask candidates to do video for us, that's not going to work. You have to buy into and embrace this is a better way to enhance the story you're trying to tell and accompany your job posting and job description with some authentic message from the people within your organization. And there's no better way that I know how to do that than with video that can be consumed over and over, it can be distributed, can be looked at again, all of that. So I think those are the keys.
Great, thank you.
And I know in the interest of time we're getting close, so a couple studies, again, not too hard to think that the time to fill, if you're not having to wait to bring in 15 in-person interviews to hire one, if you can do all 15 of those using one part of the platform, recorded or live, and only bring in the one, you can do that much more quickly, so you don't have to take the time to schedule all those interviews and have people clear their calendars for it. And then again, the cost, a lot of it, what we think of is the reimbursed candidate travel costs, like I mentioned, hotels, airfare, reimbursed mileage, that kind of thing. But it's also just the time of the people involved, from the hiring organization, the recruitment department, the hiring managers, their time that's dedicated to spending time screening or interviewing talent. And then lastly, of course, I want to thank SmartSearch and Cindy and Sylvia for hosting this hour. Love chatting with you about something we're passionate about, and if we can help, of course, we're here to do that. Contact information here. Would be happy to chat with you further about how this may work for your organization.
Thanks so much, Greg. Let me jump in real quick. I just wanted to give a shout out that I really appreciate the wonderful turnout that we had today. First of all, we have international visitors from Canada, South Africa, Sweden. I mean, we have a very great spectrum and some great questions that came from some SmartSearch users. And also very happy to see my buddies Mike and Nick from the old West Tech days were on deck today. So, Greg, thanks for pulling in an awesome audience and a terrific presentation today. Go ahead and wrap it up, Cindy.
Okay, well, thanks again, Greg, and thank you, Sylvia. So our program today was sponsored by SmartSearch Applicant Tracking Systems, and it's a part of our series of best practice webinars as a value-added service to our users and the HR and recruiting community. At SmartSearch, we're committed to continuous product improvement, ongoing training, and to provide our users with the tools and technology they need to succeed in the ever-changing recruitment landscape. For our SmartSearch users, we want to remind you that we're having a gift giveaway for regular attendance to our training webinars. You can find more information about this on the home page of your SmartSearch user account. And we have training webinars every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific time. So check often under the help section for a list of upcoming training best practices webinars. Also, we do welcome your suggestions for future best practices and training topics. For additional information and a copy of today's presentation slides, please contact Greg directly or contact your SmartSearch representative if you have any additional questions or if we can be of further assistance. Thank you again, Greg, and thank you to all who attended our presentation today. Have a fantastic day.